however bad this week is for Republicans, and believe me, it's bad, it's been even worse for the American people. First, on Trump's nearly $2 billion MAGA slush fund. Incredible depravity, disgusting selfishness. Yesterday, Trump's Department of Justice expanded the settlement he made with himself, granting him and his family immunity from tax audits. Did you hear that, America? Trump just gave his family a license to commit tax fraud to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more. He's using nearly $2 billion, America, of your taxpayer dollars that he's placed in a slush fund to enrich his MAGA loyalists. Trump doesn't have to pay his taxes, and meanwhile, he's using your tax dollars, America, to line the pockets of his families and his far-right cronies. The naked corruption, something as low and depraved as we have ever seen, is absolutely egregious. Only in Trump's Washington could a president sue himself, settle with himself, and somehow stick the American people with the bill. Who would have thought that even a man as depraved and low as Donald Trump, as dishonest and as selfish, would do something like this? Trump's slush fund is a heist where the robber owns the bank, runs the police department, and gets to pardon himself on the way out. Just as egregious as how Trump stole this money is who he plans to give it to: his billionaire cronies, convicted criminals, and the cop beaters who maimed our brave United States Capitol Police on January the 6th. Meanwhile, Trump is making a deal with himself, shaking hands with himself on a corrupt deal as he shakes down the American people. Republican senators should make no mistake. Democrats are going to force Republican senators to vote on this slush fund on the floor in the upcoming reconciliation bill in the next day or two. Republicans will not be able to duck or hide. Republicans, are you for the slush fund, this evil, corrupt slush fund, or are you against it? Are you going to bow down to Donald Trump when you know how egregious, how despicable, how nasty, how disgusting this slush fund is? Will you bow down to Trump? Will you vote for the slush fund or against it? Democrats are going to force Republicans to take a stand in the next day. Now, the next chapter, as part of Trump's terrible, terrible week, is the ballroom. Yesterday, Donald Trump defended his billion-dollar, gold-plated, taxpayer-funded ballroom, calling it, quote, a gift to the United States of America. A gift? Let's call Trump's ballroom for what it is: a boondoggle, a vanity project, an insult to every American, especially those struggling to make ends meet right now. This ballroom is no gift to the American people. It's congressional Republican personal gift to Donald J. Trump, right? It's the senators, Republican senators here in this chamber, giving Donald Trump a personal gift of $1 billion ballroom. Trump said yesterday, again, he just lies. Trump said yesterday that the ballroom is not going to be paid for by the taxpayer. Then why have Americans watched Republicans work round the clock on a proposal after proposal to grant $1 billion to build Trump's ballroom, all at the taxpayer's expense? When Trump says it's not going to be paid for by the taxpayer, it's flagrant, shameless lying. He's very good at that. Fortunately, Democrats stopped Republicans' first attempt to fund the ballroom through reconciliation. But rest assured, the Senate GOP is working to take money out of your paycheck to finance Trump's palace, America. Republicans are in such disarray as they scramble over the ballroom. Now they're slow-walking the whole process. We still don't have a reconciliation bill on our desks. Regardless of whether the ballroom funding makes it into the reconciliation bill, and Democrats will keep fighting to ensure that it doesn't, Republicans have already showed America their true colors. While Democrats are fighting to lower Americans' costs, Republicans are fighting like hell to waste billions of dollars on things taxpayers do not want, do not need, and certainly should not be forced to pay for. That's true of the billion-dollar ballroom. That's true of the tens of billions of dollars the Republican bill would give to Trump's masked agents who have gunned down Americans in the streets. It's true of the whole GOP entire agenda. Republicans can change the price tag of the ballroom. They tried to rewrite the text. They even attempted to hide this boondoggle in the bill, but we caught them. Republicans will not be able to distance themselves from this corruption. Democrats will make sure of that. No matter what happens, we will make sure the American people know where Republicans stand. We'll make sure Republicans have to go on the record and show what they're really fighting for when we vote this week. Trump's gilded palaces, not working families, not lower costs, not the American people. The American people want lower costs. They're giving money to the ballroom. They're giving money to the slush fund. How out of touch are they? How harmful are they to the working family's the average working family's interests? And then a third part of Trump's terrible, terrible, terrible week is the continuing increase in gas prices. As Americans pack up the car, fire up the grill ahead of Memorial Day, they're getting crushed by the skyrocketing costs of Trump's disastrous war in Iran. With gas selling for over $4.50 a gallon, up nearly 45% since this time last year, many Americans are canceling their Memorial Day plans because they simply can't afford to drive. Americans can't afford a barbecue when the cost of the beef they put on the grill and the propane they use to fuel it are both going up too. Republicans ought to take note that among the states that have seen the greatest increase in gas prices since the war are the battleground states of Ohio, Michigan, and Alaska. One report said those are the three highest. They're the battleground states. What did Donald Trump have to say yesterday about these surging gas prices across the country? Quote, he said, "This is peanuts." Can you believe this guy? Donald Trump thinks the hundreds of extra dollars Americans are shelling out at the gas station each month are peanuts, a pittance. What does he know? Does he ever fill up his own tank with gas? No. Trump should tell the American people that he thinks it's a pittance. And tell that to America's small businesses, which suffered their biggest decline in 2 years last month because of the surge in costs. Trump should tell that to American farmers who are struggling to afford fuel for their tractors and agricultural equipment after facing rising costs from tariffs and now increased costs of fertilizer. The GOP continues to stand by Donald Trump's handling of this war, but the cracks are starting to form. Yesterday, Democrats convinced enough Republicans to break ranks and advance our War Powers Resolution to end Trump's war. Our vote on our War Powers Resolution yesterday was an important step towards ending Trump's war, but we won't stop pushing and pushing and pushing until Republicans finally join us in ending this reckless war. Democrats are going to keep the pressure up. In conclusion, this has been a terrible week, a terrible, terrible week for Donald Trump and Republicans. And it will get only worse for our Senate Republicans during Vote-A-Rama, because Democrats are going to force Senate Republicans to vote on amendment after amendment about Trump's ballroom, Trump's slush fund, and the rising costs of Trump's war. They're not going to be able to hide. The American people are going to see the clear difference between the parties. We're for working people. We're for getting costs down, going after corruption, ending the chaos. And yet they, by backing Donald Trump, make all three worse. I encourage the American people to watch this debate, though they already know what they'll see. Republicans fighting for Trump, Democrats fighting to lower costs. And finally, to make matters even worse for this terrible, terrible week for Republicans, I'll utter one final word: Texas. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk, call the roll.
Ms. Alsor-Brooks.
Majority Whip.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I have a simple message for the dedicated men and women of ICE and Border Patrol. Help is on the way. You spent the last 5 months guarding our borders and protecting our communities. You were defunded by the Democrats. You were demonized by members of the media. Your homes and your families were threatened by radicals. Courageously, you carried out your mission, and you do it with patriotism, professionalism, and resolve. Your commitment makes America safer. Republicans are fighting to send you the support you need as you continue to do your duty. For the first time in 4 years, the United States now has a secure border. Under Joe Biden and the Democrats, 10 million illegal immigrants flooded into our country. Democrats' catch and release policies turned every state into a border state. Today, under Republicans, catch and release has been replaced with detain and deport. 0 illegal immigrants have entered our nation in the past year. Hundreds of illegal immigrant criminals are being removed each and every week. In just 2 weeks last month, officers in Houston arrested 277 illegal immigrant criminals. Criminals who had been convicted of a total of 751 offenses. This isn't an innocent group of people. It's convicted murderers, it's child abusers, it's drug dealers, it is violent gang members. And this is
a hell of a bad week for Donald Trump and his Republicans, maybe the worst week they have ever had. Bogged down by Donald Trump's stunningly corrupt MAGA slush fund, Trump's billion-dollar taxpayer-funded ballroom, and the record-breaking gas costs as we approach the Memorial Day weekend, Republicans are having a terrible, terrible week, one that may even rival as bad a week as they had when they passed their so-called big, beautiful bill, which America hated. And it's only Wednesday. It's only Wednesday. But however bad this week is for Republicans, and believe me, it's bad, it's been even worse for the American people. First, on Trump's nearly $2 billion MAGA slush fund. Incredible depravity, disgusting selfishness. Yesterday, Trump's Department of Justice expanded the settlement he made with himself, granting him and his family immunity from tax audits. Did you hear that, America? Trump just gave his family a license to commit tax fraud to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more. He's using nearly $2 billion, America, of your taxpayer dollars that he's placed in a slush fund to enrich his MAGA loyalists. Trump doesn't have to pay his taxes, and meanwhile, he's using your tax dollars, America, to line the pockets of his families and his far-right cronies. The naked corruption, something as low and depraved as we have ever seen, is absolutely egregious. Only in Trump's Washington could a president sue himself, settle with himself, and somehow stick the American people with the bill. Who would have thought that even a man as depraved and low as Donald Trump, as dishonest and as selfish, would do something like this? Trump's slush fund is a heist where the robber owns the bank, runs the police department, and gets to pardon himself on the way out. Just as egregious as how Trump stole this money is who he plans to give it to: his billionaire cronies, convicted criminals, and the cop beaters who maimed our brave United States Capitol Police on January the 6th. Meanwhile, Trump is making a deal with himself, shaking hands with himself on a corrupt deal as he shakes down the American people. Republican senators should make no mistake. Democrats are going to force Republican senators to vote on this slush fund on the floor in the upcoming reconciliation bill in the next day or two. Republicans will not be able to duck or hide. Republicans, are you for the slush fund, this evil, corrupt slush fund, or are you against it? Are you going to bow down to Donald Trump when you know how egregious, how despicable, how nasty, how disgusting this slush fund is? Will you bow down to Trump? Will you vote for the slush fund or against it? Democrats are going to force Republicans to take a stand in the next day. Now, the next chapter, as part of Trump's terrible, terrible week, is the ballroom. Yesterday, Donald Trump defended his billion-dollar, gold-plated, taxpayer-funded ballroom, calling it, quote, a gift to the United States of America. A gift? Let's call Trump's ballroom for what it is: a boondoggle, a vanity project, an insult to every American, especially those struggling to make ends meet right now. This ballroom is no gift to the American people. It's congressional Republican personal gift to Donald J. Trump, right? It's the senators, Republican senators here in this chamber, giving Donald Trump a personal gift of a billion-dollar ballroom. Trump said yesterday, again, he just lies. Trump said yesterday that the ballroom is not going to be paid for by the taxpayer. Then why have Americans watched Republicans work round the clock on a proposal after proposal to grant $1 billion to build Trump's ballroom, all at the taxpayer's expense? When Trump says it's not going to be paid for by the taxpayer, it's flagrant, shameless lying. He's very good at that. Fortunately, Democrats stopped Republicans' first attempt to fund the ballroom through reconciliation. But rest assured, the Senate GOP is working to take money out of your paycheck to finance Trump's palace, America. Republicans are in such disarray as they scramble over the ballroom. Now they're slow-walking the whole process. We still don't have a reconciliation bill on our desks. Regardless of whether the ballroom funding makes it into the reconciliation bill, and Democrats will keep fighting to ensure that it doesn't, Republicans have already showed America their true colors. While Democrats are fighting to lower Americans' costs, Republicans are fighting like hell to waste billions of dollars on things taxpayers do not want, do not need, and certainly should not be forced to pay for. That's true of the billion-dollar ballroom. That's true of the tens of billions of dollars the Republican bill would give to Trump's masked agents who have gunned down Americans in the streets. It's true of the whole GOP entire agenda. Republicans can change the price tag of the ballroom. They tried to rewrite the text. They even attempted to hide this boondoggle in the bill, but we caught them. Republicans will not be able to distance themselves from this corruption. Democrats will make sure of that. No matter what happens, we will make sure the American people know where Republicans stand. We'll make sure Republicans have to go on the record and show what they're really fighting for when we vote this week. Trump's gilded palaces, not working families, not lower costs, not the American people. The American people want lower costs. They're giving money to the ballroom. They're giving money to the slush fund. How out of touch are they? How harmful are they to the working family's the average working family's interests? And then a third part of Trump's terrible, terrible, terrible week is the continuing increase in gas prices. As Americans pack up the car, fire up the grill ahead of Memorial Day, they're getting crushed by the skyrocketing costs of Trump's disastrous war in Iran. With gas selling for over $4.50 a gallon, up nearly 45% since this time last year, many Americans are canceling their Memorial Day plans because they simply can't afford to drive. Americans can't afford a barbecue when the cost of the beef they put on the grill and the propane they use to fuel it are both going up too. Republicans ought to take note that among the states that have seen the greatest increase in gas prices since the war are the battleground states of Ohio, Michigan, and Alaska. One report said those are the three highest. They're the battleground states. What did Donald Trump have to say yesterday about these surging gas prices across the country? Quote, he said, "This is peanuts." Can you believe this guy? Donald Trump thinks the hundreds of extra dollars Americans are shelling out at the gas station each month are peanuts, a pittance. What does he know? Does he ever fill up his own tank with gas? No. Trump should tell the American people that he thinks it's a pittance. And tell that to America's small businesses, which suffered their biggest decline in 2 years last month because of the surge in costs. Trump should tell that to American farmers who are struggling to afford fuel for their tractors and agricultural equipment after facing rising costs from tariffs and now increased costs of fertilizer. The GOP continues to stand by Donald Trump's handling of this war, but the cracks are starting to form. Yesterday, Democrats convinced enough Republicans to break ranks and advance our War Powers Resolution to end Trump's war. Our vote on our War Powers Resolution yesterday was an important step towards ending Trump's war, but we won't stop pushing and pushing and pushing until Republicans finally join us in ending this reckless war. Democrats are going to keep the pressure up. In conclusion, this has been a terrible week, a terrible, terrible week for Donald Trump and Republicans. And it will get only worse for our Senate Republicans during vote-a-rama, because Democrats are going to force Senate Republicans to vote on amendment after amendment about Trump's ballroom, Trump's slush fund, and the rising costs of Trump's war. They're not going to be able to hide. The American people are going to see the clear difference between the parties. We're for working people. We're for getting costs down, going after corruption, ending the chaos. And yet they, by backing Donald Trump, make all three worse. I encourage the American people to watch this debate, though they already know what they'll see. Republicans fighting for Trump, Democrats fighting to lower costs. And finally, to make matters even worse for this terrible, terrible week for Republicans, I'll utter one final word: Texas. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsor-Brooks.
Majority Whip.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I have a simple message for the dedicated men and women of ICE and Border Patrol. Help is on the way. You spent the last 5 months guarding our borders and protecting our communities. You were defunded by the Democrats. You were demonized by members of the media. Your homes and your families were threatened by radicals. Courageously, you carried out your mission, and you do it with patriotism, professionalism, and resolve. Your commitment makes America safer. Republicans are fighting to send you the support you need as you continue to do your duty. For the first time in 4 years, the United States now has a secure border. Under Joe Biden and the Democrats, 10 million illegal immigrants flooded into our country. Democrats' catch-and-release policies turned every state into a border state. Today, under Republicans, catch-and-release has been replaced with detain and deport. A
hell of a bad week for Donald Trump and his Republicans, maybe the worst week they have ever had. Bogged down by Donald Trump's stunningly corrupt MAGA slush fund, Trump's billion-dollar taxpayer-funded ballroom, and the record-breaking gas costs as we approach the Memorial Day weekend, Republicans are having a terrible, terrible week. One that may even rival as bad a week as they had when they passed their so-called big, beautiful bill, which America hated. And it's only Wednesday. It's only Wednesday. But however bad this week is for Republicans, and believe me, it's bad, it's been even worse for the American people. First, on Trump's nearly $2 billion MAGA slush fund. Incredible depravity, disgusting selfishness. Yesterday, Trump's Department of Justice expanded the settlement he made with himself, granting him and his family immunity from tax audits. Did you hear that, America? Trump just gave his family a license to commit tax fraud to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more. He's using nearly $2 billion, America, of your taxpayer dollars that he's placed in a slush fund to enrich his MAGA loyalists. Trump doesn't have to pay his taxes, and meanwhile, he's using your tax dollars, America, to line the pockets of his families and his far-right cronies. The naked corruption, something as low and depraved as we have ever seen, is absolutely egregious. Only in Trump's Washington could a president sue himself, settle with himself, and somehow stick the American people with the bill. Who would have thought that even a man as depraved and low as Donald Trump, as dishonest and as selfish, would do something like this? Trump's slush fund is a heist where the robber owns the bank, runs the police department, and gets to pardon himself on the way out. Just as egregious as how Trump stole this money is who he plans to give it to: his billionaire cronies, convicted criminals, and the cop beaters who maimed our brave United States Capitol Police on January the 6th. Meanwhile, Trump is making a deal with himself, shaking hands with himself on a corrupt deal as he shakes down the American people. Republican senators should make no mistake. Democrats are going to force Republican senators to vote on this slush fund on the floor in the upcoming reconciliation bill in the next day or two. Republicans will not be able to duck or hide. Republicans, are you for the slush fund, this evil, corrupt slush fund, or are you against it? Know how egregious, how despicable, how nasty, how disgusting this slush fund is? Will you bow down to Trump? Will you vote for the slush fund or against it? Democrats are going to force Republicans to take a stand in the next day. Now, the next chapter, as part of Trump's terrible, terrible week, is the ballroom. Yesterday, Donald Trump defended his billion-dollar, gold-plated, taxpayer-funded ballroom, calling it, quote, a gift to the United States of America. A gift? Let's call Trump's ballroom for what it is: a boondoggle, a vanity project, an insult to every American, especially those struggling to make ends meet right now. This ballroom is no gift to the American people. It's congressional Republican personal gift to Donald J. Trump, right? It's the senators, Republican senators here in this chamber, giving Donald Trump a personal gift of a billion-dollar ballroom. Trump said yesterday, again, he just lies. Trump said yesterday that the ballroom is not going to be paid for by the taxpayer. Then why have Americans watched Republicans work round the clock on a proposal after proposal to grant $1 billion to build Trump's ballroom, all at the taxpayer's expense? When Trump says it's not going to be paid for by the taxpayer, it's flagrant, shameless lying. He's very good at that. Fortunately, Democrats stopped Republicans' first attempt to fund the ballroom through reconciliation. But rest assured, the Senate GOP is working to take money out of your paycheck to finance Trump's palace, America. Republicans are in such disarray as they scramble over the ballroom. Now they're slow-walking the whole process. We still don't have a reconciliation bill on our desks. Regardless of whether the ballroom funding makes it into the reconciliation bill, and Democrats will keep fighting to ensure that it doesn't, Republicans have already showed America their true colors. While Democrats are fighting to lower Americans' costs, Republicans are fighting like hell to waste billions of dollars on things taxpayers do not want, do not need, and certainly should not be forced to pay for. That's true of the billion-dollar ballroom. That's true of the tens of billions of dollars the Republican bill would give to Trump's masked agents who have gunned down Americans in the streets. It's true of the whole GOP entire agenda. Republicans can change the price tag of the ballroom. They tried to rewrite the text. They even attempted to hide this boondoggle in the bill, but we caught them.
Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso, aye. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, no. Mrs. Capito. Mrs. Capito, aye. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mrs. Hyde-Smith, aye. Mr. Kim. Mr. Kim, no. Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Wyden, no. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schatz, no. Mr. Haggerty. Mr. Haggerty, aye. Mr. Husted. Mr. Husted, aye. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Ossoff, no. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy, aye. Mr. Padilla? Mr. Padilla? No. Mr. Curtis? Mr. Curtis? Aye. Mr. Ricketts? Mr. Ricketts? Aye. Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson? Aye. Mr. Crapo? Mr. Crapo? Aye. Mr. Warnock? Mr. Warnock? No. Mr. Whitehouse? Mr. Whitehouse? No. Mr. Marino? Mr. Marino? Aye. Ms. Ernst? Ms. Ernst? Aye. Ms. Klobuchar? Ms. Klobuchar? No. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, aye. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kane, no. Mr. Hickenlooper. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Mr. Langford. Mr. Langford, aye. Mr. Murphy. Mr. Murphy, no. Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. King. Mr. King, no. Ms. Warren. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Fisher, aye. Mr. Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong, aye. Mrs. Britt. Mrs. Britt, aye. Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Tuberville, aye. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Rounds, aye. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mr. Marshall. Mr. Marshall, aye. Mr. Budd. Mr. Budd, aye. Ms. Cortez Masto. Ms. Cortez Masto, no. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed, no. Ms. Lummis. Ms. Lummis, aye. Ms. Cantwell. Ms. Cantwell, no. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Grassley, aye. Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Schmidt, aye. Mr. Justice. Mr. Justice, aye. Mr. McCormick. Mr. McCormick, aye. Ms. Rosen? Ms. Rosen? No. Mr. Blumenthal? Mr. Blumenthal? No. Mr. Coons? Mr. Coons? No. Mr. Warner? Mr. Warner? No. Mr. Hoven? Mr. Hoven? Aye. Mr. Sullivan? Mr. Sullivan? Aye. Ms. Hirono? Ms. Hirono? No. Mr. Van Hollen? Mr. Van Hollen? No. Mr. McConnell? Mr. McConnell? Aye. Mrs. Gillibrand? Mrs. Gillibrand? No. Ms. Slotkin. Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, no. Mr. Lujan. Mr. Lujan, no. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Welch. Mr. Welch, no. Mr. Fetterman. Mr. Fetterman, no. Mr. Gallego. Mr. Gallego, no. Mr. Young. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Shaheen. Mr. Shaheen, no. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, no. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Heinrich, no. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Hawley, aye. Ms. Alsobrooks. Ms. Alsobrooks, no. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly, no. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, aye. Mr. Daines. Mr. Daines, aye. Mr. Markey. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Cassidy. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Durbin, no.
On this vote, the yeas are 52, the nays are 47, and the nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table, and the President will be immediately notified of the Senate's actions.
Mr. President,
Senator from Wyoming.
I have 12 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Mr. President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources be discharged from further consideration and the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of the following bills en bloc: S603 and S790.
Without objection, the clerk will report en bloc.
S603, a bill to designate the General George C. Marshall House in the Commonwealth of Virginia as an affiliated area of the National Park System and for other purposes. S790, a bill to redesignate the National Historic Trails Interpretive Center in Casper, Wyoming as the Barbara L. Cuban National Historic Trails Interpretive Center.
Is there an objection to proceeding to the measures en bloc? Without objection, the committee is discharged. And the Senate will proceed to the measures en bloc.
Mr. President, I further ask that the bills be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, all en bloc.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, there are many days that I come to this floor to talk about a lot of different policy issues and things we need to get done, and there are a lot of things that need to get done. Our list is long here in the Senate. I did just want to take a moment of personal privilege, not talk about policy for just a moment, but talk about some people. I've got 2 staff members that are leaving my team that my state and the nation may or may not know their name, but they have been exceptionally impactful in what they have done. Jesse Mahan has been on my team, as he reminds me so long that when he first came on the team, he was issued a BlackBerry when he first came on the team. He came on writing letters and doing background work. He led Indian Affairs. He's a tribal member, was a terrific hand in a lot of different areas. He ended up leading a lot of my budget work and then eventually tax work here. He's led through a lot of really complicated issues over the years, and every single time, whether it is tribal law or whether it is tax law, which both of them are very complicated, he thrived. He did his homework, and he helped this nation. There were significant areas of the working families tax cut last year that we got over the finish line because of his work with some of the staff behind the scenes to be able to explain some of the complexity and to be able to convince some people this is actually good for the economy. And he did a terrific job through that process. Unfortunately, we are losing him in the next week, and he will be dearly missed on our team. But there's a lady on our team that is not just a member of our team, she is an Oklahoma institution. Her name is Ramona Taylor. She was born in Oklahoma City, but if you ask her, she's going to claim Burns Flat, Oklahoma. You got to be from Oklahoma to know where Burns Flat is from, or use Google Maps. But Burns Flat, small town, western Oklahoma, she brought those small town, western Oklahoma values to our team as well. She has served the nation for 41 years. 41 years of federal service. And unfortunately, she is retiring. And my state has no idea what's about to happen in the loss of Mona Taylor. She graduated from Burns Flat in 1979, then she went to Central State University, which is now called the University of Central Oklahoma, got a bachelor's degree in business administration, and then began her federal career serving with Congressman Mickey Edwards. Now, this will tell you how long ago that was. At the time, Mickey Edwards was the only Republican member of Congress from Oklahoma. We had one, and it was Mickey. And she served with Mickey Edwards there. She met her husband in 1992, Andy, who is air traffic controller, who has been a terrific leader. They've now been married for 34 years. I have to tell you, she has done remarkable work in ways that people will never know, but just the story of her life is also significant as well. Being the girl from Burns Flat and then finding ways to be able to serve that the country will never forget. She and Andy, when they were married in 1992, they ended up, with his career in air traffic control, moving up to Washington, D.C. They just had their first son, Clay, in 1994, and they moved up to D.C. to have this job up here to be able to work alongside Andy. It was a painful day in April 19th, 1995, when the Murrah Building bombing happened in Oklahoma City. It's a painful day for the entire country, but especially for those of us from Oklahoma. But she realized that day that if she had not been with her husband here in Washington, D.C., that their young son, Clay, would have actually been in the Murrah Building bombing in that daycare that day. It never leaves you. She and her constituent work did a remarkable amount of constituent work to be able to walk alongside families during that time period, because as you can imagine, there was a lot to do. At the time, she had come up to be able to work with Frank Lucas and was serving alongside him in his office here. She returned to work with a guy named J.C. Watts and to be able to serve with J.C. Watts, and then with the person after him, Tom Cole. Along the way, her second son, Sam, was born in 1996, and they continue to be able to build their family. Mona really sunk into what some people call constituent services. She just calls ministry to people. She wants to help in every way that she possibly can. Mona was the one when people want to call and to be able to yell on the phone and they're just angry at whatever's going on in government. Mona was always the calming voice to be able to listen. In fact, our team calls it getting Mona'd, because this angry person would rage and she would listen and calm them, would take notes. And I would tell you, if she couldn't calm them down and they just wanted to continue to be able to scream and cuss at her endlessly, she would just say, "God loves you, thank you, goodbye," and just hang up. Because she wants to be able to help people, just to be able to see that things can get better. And she's helped make it that way over and over again. She had a short stint working with the FAA, and in her leadership role at the FAA is when I was actually elected in the House of Representatives. I'll never forget how I met her. I knew her husband, Andy, before I knew Mona. And we were planning to go on a mission trip together on it, and I had to sit down with Andy and say, "Hey, I can't go on this mission trip because you don't know it. I've not announced it yet, but I'm going to be running for Congress. And so I'm not going to be able to leave with you to go on this mission trip in the days ahead because that's going to be a distraction to what's going on." And I remember him saying to me, "Do you know who my wife is?" And I said, "No." And he said, "My wife's Mona Taylor." And I remember distinctly saying to him, "The Mona Taylor is your wife?" And I said, "I'd love to be able to pick her brain." Everybody wants to know Mona Taylor because she knows so much of behind the scenes about how federal offices work, from working with so many different federal offices and actually finding ways to not just do the job, but to actually serve people in that role, to set an atmosphere on this. I was honored in 2011 when I came in the House of Representatives that Mona agreed to leave FAA, come back into congressional service, and to be able to serve as my district director. And then when I was elected into the Senate, she then took the role as the state director for me. Never regretted that. She's an absolute heart of gold and loves people in that. She's often said that she wants our office to be known for our casework, how we take care of people, and it is. Mona has also mentored countless staff from all of the federal delegation in our state. Literally, there is no caseworker in any of the 7 federal offices in our state that Mona has not impacted in some ways. Mona was the congressional staffer when the Edmond Post Office shooting happened in 1986. She was the one working with all of those families and trying to be able to help through years ago. She was the one doing a lot of the casework, as I mentioned before, in 1995, with all the victims and families around the Murrah building bombing. She was the one that is actually taking care of a lot of these issues and coordinating the work behind the scenes to make sure we help each person. Mona even notoriously in her family, as she drives into work, prays for the task and what she's going to do that day. We've never forgotten the day that Mona, on the way into work, saw 2 French bulldogs just on the side of the road and determined those French bulldogs were probably somebody's. And so she just picked them up, put them in her car, and then started working to try to figure out, because they had to be a constituent, try to figure out how to be able to take care of a constituent that lost 2 French bulldogs. You know what? She figured it out and got their dogs back to them. So apparently, Mona not only loves people, but she loves dogs as well, because she knows they're attached to people. I would tell you, Mona was also that person always that you don't ever tell her you like something she has. Because if you tell her, if one of the staff members were to say to her, "I really like that jacket that you're wearing," she would just take it off and give it to him. If she brought something for lunch one day and they would say, "That smells delicious," well, guess what? She would actually bring it to them the next day to be able to make sure they had it. Because Mona's mission was always to take care of people, has always been that way. That's why I think Oklahomans have no idea how hard this is going to be for our state, because a person in the middle of our federal delegation has had that heart for 4 decades and has impacted the way that we take care of people. Now, I don't fault Mona for retiring. Her best job is her job of being Momo to her granddaughter, Georgia Marie. She's the biggest cheerleader for her 2 boys, and she loves taking care of Andy. She dedicated early on, according to their agreement, that their house will never, ever, ever, ever run out of ketchup, ever. because Andy loves ketchup, and she, early on in their marriage, said, our house will never, ever run out of ketchup. Mona is also the person that keeps the mom drawer in her desk. She is the one in her office. If you need a Band-Aid, if you need something else, Mona's got it, and she's going to take care of everybody else. Her record keeping is a gift to us because we're going to be able to go through and to see the cases and the things and the people that she's done, but really her heart for service will be the legacy for Mona Taylor. And I know, again, we talk about a lot of policy issues here, but I just didn't want to miss a moment for us to remember that our policy issues are all connected to people. Mona never forgot that, ever. And I've been honored to be able to serve with her this decade and a half. And I'm grateful for the gift of her time to our state and her mentorship to so many different staff across our state. So to Mona, I would just say to this body, we owe a lot to her. And she will be missed. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this has nothing to do with why I'm speaking, but I was sitting there thinking, listening to Senator Lankford talk about Miss Mona. Miss Mona, we're going to miss you. And I was thinking, you know, I know it's a sin to covet, but I wish God had given me a voice like Senator Lankford. You know, he gave me a voice that scares small children and sets off car alarms. I'd love to have a voice like Senator Lankford. I'd also like to have his big brain, too. That was really nice of you, James. And thank you, Mona, for your service. With me today are two of my colleagues. Mr. John Lowry, my executive assistant. You've met John before. But the star of the show today, for me anyway, is Ms. Kaylin Sheehan. Kaylin is also an executive assistant to me. Her job includes scheduling, source job in America. All scheduling jobs are tough because you have to tell a small percentage of people yes, but a whole lot of people no. And some people don't take no well. Kaylin is leaving me. I say that with joy and sadness. As I've said before, I try to hire the best people I can, and when you do that, as you know, Mr. President, you hire good people, and they're ambitious, and they want to move up, and so it's just a price you pay. Kaylin is very, very smart. She's got an undergraduate degree and an MBA degree. In college, she really was a good student, but she was also a student athlete. She played soccer in college and was very good at it. Kaylin never loses her composure. She's steady. She never panics. And I said, you know, that doesn't sound like a big deal, I suppose, but being a scheduler up here is hard. It's really, really, really hard. Caitlin is going to work for Congressman Riley Moore in West Virginia. She's gotten a fancy title there, Director of Operations. Congratulations, Congressman. You're getting a good one in Caitlin. I hate to lose her, but it's a step up for her, and she'll be not just doing scheduling, but doing other things in the office. So, Caitlin, I wanted to ask you to come down and say thank you. Thank you for your good work. All right, I just want to talk for a few minutes about what I think should be obvious. I mean, I know cost of living is a problem in America today. We all know that, Mr. President. I like to say when moms and dads go to sleep at night and can't, you know, one of the things they're worried about is the cost of living. I get that. What could we do to help? Well, obviously, one thing we could do would be to lower taxes. We've got to be careful how we do that because we don't want to increase the deficit. We don't want to just borrow money to do that. Another thing we could do to help would be to lower interest rates. If we lowered interest rates, people would pay less interest on their credit cards, on their car loans, on their house notes. Well, what could we do, Mr. President, and you know this, to spend less so we could cut taxes and also lower interest rates? One of the things we could do is stop fraud. One of the things we can do is stop the outrageous fraud in our Medicaid program. Now, look, I want to be very clear here. I'm proud of Medicaid. I mean, I'm proud of the fact that in our country, if you're too poor to be sick, we will pay for your doctor. That's not true in every country, as you know, Mr. President. Some countries, they'll just let you die in a ditch. We don't do that in America. We will pay for your medical care. But that's outrageously expensive. It's okay, money well spent, but it's very, very expensive. And one of the ways we pay for people's care, particularly for low-income Americans, but also now even more so for middle-class Americans since Obamacare passed, is through Medicaid. We spend almost $1 trillion on Medicaid every year. And once again, I'm not speaking against the concept of Medicaid. We don't want people to die in America. It's one of the things that separates us from other people. But we spend almost $1 trillion a year, and the federal government, some people don't know this, pays for 67% of all Medicaid spending. Some people refer to Medicaid as a federal state program, and it is. The state puts up some of the money, but the federal government puts up most of the money. We pay for about 67% of all the spending in Medicaid. And Medicaid keeps going up. I mean, I've seen studies that show it's going up anywhere consistently between 6 and 8% every single year. And when you're spending $1 trillion and it goes up 6 to 8%, you're talking about real money. What we also know is that there is an enormous amount of fraud in Medicaid. I mean, we know that. There are a lot of studies out there, and not everyone can agree on how much, but I have seen studies from reputable think tanks that show that Medicaid fraud, stealing in the Medicaid program, runs between $1.1 and $1.2 trillion over a 10-year period. Can you imagine what we could do to lower interest rates or to reduce taxes if we could save $1.2 trillion on our budget? Now, how does this happen? Well, first of all, why don't the states do a better job of controlling the fraud? And I say, why am I blaming the states? Well, because it's a federal state program, and the feds put up 67% of the money, but the states administer that program. And some states do a pretty good job. Some states do a very good job. Some states are terrible at it. I don't know exactly why that is, but every state, I want to make this clear, has fraud. I saw an audit done by our Inspector General in Louisiana a few years ago, and he talked about the incidence of fraud in the Medicaid program in Louisiana, the people who were getting Medicaid who didn't qualify. And I said, can you send me a list of all the people you found in the Medicaid program who didn't qualify, who were making too much money? I don't want names. I just want the amounts of money that they were making and how long they'd been on Medicaid, and he sent me the list, and if I stacked it up here, I could stand on it and paint the ceiling. I mean, we had people making $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 a year getting Medicaid. Now, that was the state's fault for not checking. Some people say the states don't have any incentive. That's a cynical view. I'd prefer not to believe that's true. But they see Medicaid as free money since the federal government is picking up most of the tab. I prefer not to think that's true, but it's probably true to some extent. The point is that if our states would do a better job administering the Medicaid program, and stopping the stealing, we could save $1.2 trillion over the next 10 years to help people reach the point where they don't have to sell blood plasma to go to the grocery store. You probably think I'm going to talk about Minnesota, and I'm not. We all know what happened in the Medicaid program in Minnesota. The state of Minnesota basically declared that Medicaid was an open bar. Just come on down, and if you want Medicaid and you want the Medicaid money and you want to steal some, you're welcome to it. I hate to say that, but that's what happened. And I hope every single person who was involved in that stealing up there goes to jail. Every single one. But what I wanted to talk about was, and again, every state has this problem, but some have it worse than others. And one of the ones besides Minnesota that seems to have a problem controlling stealing in the Medicaid program is California. Now, California spends an enormous amount of money on Medicaid. They spend about $220 billion a year. The federal taxpayer puts up $140 billion of that. So the federal taxpayer, the taxpayers who pay money to the federal government put up most of the money. Not all of it, but most of the money. How much does the federal government put up vis-a-vis the state government? Well, in the Obamacare portion of Medicaid, the federal government puts up $9. So for every $1 that the state government puts up for the Medicaid program, the federal government puts up $9. Wow. And some of the public officials in California have started to look at this as free money, just free money. And they don't try to fight the fraud. Now, how do you stop the fraud? One thing a state can do is investigate people who claim they're health care providers. We saw this as a problem in Minnesota. If you claim to be a home health provider, you're supposed to have a minimum level of qualification. If you claim to offer to provide after-school services, you're supposed to have a certain level of qualification. I don't think the state government in California even checks. We've got every fly-by-night artist in America, it seems, going to California to become a health care provider to get some of the money. And a lot of the times when they get that money, the money never makes it to the patient. They steal it. California, for example, has 12% of the population. In the last decade, they have been responsible for 50% of all of the new health care providers formed in America. Most of them are social assistance and so-called health care establishments. And there's an enormous amount of fraud there. We saw that once again in Minnesota, which has been publicized more, where people say, I'm now a health care provider. Give me the money, and so I can help people. And you give this fly-by-night health care provider money, and they never help people. So that's one way. The other way that you can control the spending in Medicaid is to be careful about the services you offer. You want to spend the Medicaid money on people who need it. You want to spend the Medicaid money on people who need it because they're sick. That's why we passed Medicaid. But states, once again, administer their own Medicaid programs, and for the most part, they get to decide what services their Medicaid program pays for. Now, supposedly the federal government has to sign off on it, and clearly we've got to do a better job there, and I'll save that topic for another day. But what got my attention about California, despite the fact that they have thousands and thousands of these fly-by-night so-called health care providers who the state government in California happily gives money to, and sometimes some of that money gets to a patient, but most of the time it gets into their pocket. What got my attention was the services that California's state government will pay for in its Medicaid program with money from the federal government, which has been provided by the American people. Here's an example. And this came from an article, this isn't my research, this came from an editorial in the Wall Street Journal, a recent editorial, May 16, 2026. In California, under its state government's definition of Medicaid, the California Medicaid program will pay for tribal prayers. The California Medicaid program will pay for exorcisms. The California Medicaid program will pay for herbal medicines. The California Medicaid program will pay for meal deliveries. In some cases, the California Medicaid program will pay for in-home chefs. Thousands of businesses have popped up in California that literally cater to Medicaid patients. The Medicaid program in California will pay for sports club fees. The Medicaid program in California will pay for a gym membership. The Medicaid program in California will actually pay student loans. They do it under the guise of, well, we want to encourage people to become health care providers, and they can't do it if they have onerous financial burdens, so we'll pay for their health care. Now, once again, Medicaid is supposed to be for sick people. When you're spending other people's money, it's real easy to expand beyond that. The Medicaid program in California will pay for scooters. I get that. Sometimes that might be necessary. Bicycles, but it'll also pay for music lessons. The Medicaid program in California will also pay for art lessons. This money didn't just fall from heaven. We all thank heaven for it, but it came out of people's pockets. And that's how we end up having $1.2 trillion over a 10-year period stolen from the Medicaid program. Money that was put up by the American people. It happens in every state. Some are worse than others. Minnesota's an example, but so is California. When you're taking American taxpayer dollars and spending them on an exorcism or a gym membership, something's wrong. And if we want to lower the cost of living in America, if if we want to be able to find the money to give people a tax break, if we want to lower interest rates in America, one of the easiest, best ways to do it is to try to fight the fraud in our Medicaid program. It's as simple as that. $1.2 trillion over 10 years of fraud. This didn't just happen, Mr. President, as you know. This has been going on for a long, long time. And I want to give credit where credit is due. Dr. Oz, our new CMS director, the Department of Justice are both working to try to stop this fraud. But it has been there since God was a baby. And it's got to stop now. And that's what I wanted to, and this is, it's out in the open, and this is not something I'm accusing anybody of unfairly, okay? These are just the facts. So with that, Mr. President, I thank you for your attention. I thank Kaylin for her great work, and peace out. Mr. President, I want to thank the parliamentarian, too. She didn't rule me out of order one time. Thank you, Madam Parliamentarian.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Hawaii.
Mr. President, $1 billion goes a very long way, especially in a state like Hawaii. With $1 billion, we could cover out-of-pocket costs for insulin for every person in the state who relies on it for almost 20 years. We could help to provide healthy meals to women, infants, and children in need for almost 40 years. We could cover the cost of child care for nearly every child under 3 in Hawaii for an entire year. Or we could cover tuition for every in-state undergraduate student at the University of Hawaii for close to a decade. But instead of doing any of that this week, Republicans plan to give Donald Trump $1 billion for, of all things, a ballroom. Now, let's be perfectly clear. I have no problem investing in our great capital city or its infrastructure. I was the top Democrat on the Legislative Branch Appropriations Subcommittee when we provided funding to restore this capital's dome. We are the greatest nation on earth, and our physical infrastructure should reflect that. So if you want to clean up the parks or turn on the fountains or restore the monuments, count me in. But that's not what this is. This is not a normal beautification project in the district. This is a president who's about to turn 80 and nearing the end of his political career, and all he can think about is building monuments to himself. Other leaders in this position might be thinking about their legacy in policy terms, but not this president. He's single-mindedly focused on building ballrooms and arches and golf courses, while the rest of the country struggles to put food on the table or to even see a doctor. The ballroom started out, in Trump's own words, as, quote, taxpayer-free. I will fund it, he said. I'm not going to ask the government for money. A year later, he's realized that he needs government money, taxpayer money. And because the administration lost a court case on the basis that this project was never authorized by Congress, they're now looking for any statute that they can use to defend themselves in the future. This is a priority for one person and one person only. And I know my colleagues are in a very tough spot because it's their president. They agree with him about a bunch of stuff. And it's really important to him. But I can tell you I have not met a Republican senator who likes this idea. I have met lots of them who are going to vote for it anyway. Why are we spending $1 billion on a ballroom when gas is at $4.53 nationally and $5.64 in Hawaii? What possible justification is there for, on the one hand, ending subsidies that helped 22 million Americans to afford health care, and then turning around and bankrolling a new building just so Donald Trump can throw fancy parties for his rich friends? And that sounds like something that I'm making up. But that's literally what this is. It's a $1 billion ballroom so he can throw fancy parties for his rich friends. People in Hawaii and all across the country are struggling just to get by. Grocery prices are rising at the fastest rate in years because Trump's war in Iran is driving up shipping and fertilizer costs. Electricity bills continue to outpace inflation with no end in sight, leaving 1 in 3 Americans struggling to pay their utility bills. More than 900 hospitals, nursing homes, and other facilities are at risk or have already reduced services or shut down altogether because Republicans gutted health care last year. And because of those very same cuts, 1 in 5 Americans who used to get their health care through the ACA marketplace no longer have coverage. And millions of others are paying thousands more for the same plan. We could be working to solve any of those issues, but we are not. Now, here's the thing. The way this weird place works is that in order to enact most statutes, you need a combination of Democrats and Republicans. You need 60 votes. However, there's this weird thing called reconciliation where basically twice a year, if it's budgetary, if it adds to the deficit or it reduces the deficit, so spending counts, you get to do something without the other party. The majority party basically gets to ignore the minority and pass what it wants. And so when we were in power, we used this unique tool to reduce the cost of prescription medicine. We enacted a corporate minimum tax. We took climate action. We gave people cash benefits so they could survive during COVID. And look, you can argue about what we did or how we did it. That's fine, that's fair. But it certainly reflected the priorities of the day. But given the chance to do the same, you get these two kind of golden tickets where you get to ignore us, you would think that when you're passing major legislation, one of your two big opportunities, that it would address the cost of health care or the cost of fuel or the cost of food or the cost of prescription medicine or the cost of gasoline. But they are using this golden ticket, this twice-a-year opportunity to increase funding for ICE at nearly 4 times their normal levels and give the president a ballroom. People are struggling everywhere in red states and blue states, but there's not a dime for you in the bill they're about to pass tomorrow. And it's not by accident. I yield the floor.
The senator from Alaska.
Are we in a quorum call?
No.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, earlier this month, when I was back home in Alaska, I had an opportunity to have a two-part field hearing in my role as the chairman of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. And what the committee was seeking to do was to examine the impacts of ex-Typhoon Halong. This was a major, major storm that devastated much of western Alaska back in October of 2025. And the committee looked to explore the various federal responses, the mitigation efforts, but also recovery programs that are available for tribal communities. And as I begin my comments today, I want to acknowledge the ever-present reality of the environmental threats to our coastal western Alaska villages. This has been a problem, a challenge for us for some period of time. It was 22 years ago. I sat at a different field hearing in Anchorage. It was convened by Senator Ted Stevens at the time. He was, I believe, chairing the Commerce Committee, but we heard testimony about the erosion and the flooding that was affecting coastal Alaska Native villages. And even then, 22, 23 years ago, Senator Stevens and I heard about the challenges that were faced by these typically very small, very rural communities in our state. And even back then, many of these communities were considering relocation. And it was from that initial field hearing that it was identified the many threatened communities, threatened by erosion, threatened by permafrost, a thaw. And so I think it's important to try to understand why we have so many Alaska villages that face this threat. In part, they're in Alaska. We're an Arctic state. We're a state that is seeing the impact of warming more dramatically than any other place in the country. We're also a big, big state, but it also goes back to the way that many tribal communities were established across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. We refer to this as the YK Delta. The native people of that region are largely Cupik and Yupik people. They were historically nomadic people, and they moved with the seasons. They basically followed the subsistence resource, whether it was the game, whether it was the fish. But when the fall came, which is the time when we see stronger storms, storm surges, they would often move onto higher ground to avoid the worst of a storm's effects. But history moves forward, and following the purchase of Alaska from Russia, and in line with the assimilationist policies of the time, the Bureau of Indian Affairs began to build schools, and this caused families to settle then around the schools. But the settlement locations were not chosen following good feasibility studies or a good, robust cost-benefit analysis. They didn't navigate environmental reviews or work through a lengthy permitting process, nor were they developed in conversation and consultation with surrounding Native communities whose traditional knowledge about the land may have helped them avoid some ecological hazards. Then, with the passage of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, the Alaska National Interest Land Conservation Act, ANILCA, the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA, and so many of the other laws regarding land ownership and the environment, what we saw were the Yupik and the Cupik people were largely unable to relocate as they historically might have. And as such, over time, many of these small Alaska Native villages have experienced more and greater natural disasters. And some of them have been extremely devastating. And this is where I'd like to speak about ex-Typhoon Halong. It's now 7 months after this typhoon hit western Alaska. But that 7 months has not dulled the terror of that storm, which is still present with so many. The storm crossed over 100,000 square miles. This is an area roughly the size of Colorado, and people in the region, again, primarily along the coast, very exposed, but they experienced winds exceeding 100 miles an hour and flooding, storm surge pushing the flood waters up to 25 miles inland from the coast. So you think you're safe when you're inland, not so much when we have these extraordinary storm surges. There are two villages that were devastated, the native village of Kipnuk and Quigillingok. And the damage there to homes and community facilities was so great that the residents had to be evacuated. They were taken either to Bethel or to Anchorage. But when I say evacuated, they were evacuated by the hundreds in the belly of a C-130 that came in, landed, and a mass evacuation of these small villages. The pictures of hundreds of Native families sitting on the floor of a C-130, flying to safety because their villages had literally been swept away. And I think it's important to keep in mind, Bethel, it's 150 miles from Kipnuk. Anchorage, 500 miles. So they're being evacuated from their village to, in Bethel's case, it's a hub village, but it is still far away. And when I say these villages were damaged, it was 90% of Kipnuk's community infrastructure that was destroyed or rendered entirely unusable. I was able to go into Kipnuk with several of the military leadership within less than a week after the storm hit. It was eerily quiet. Really, the only sounds that one heard was an occasional dog that was barking because the people, when they were evacuated, were not allowed to take their animals. It was devastation like something I've not ever seen. Kipnuk is a boardwalk community, which means that it is built on a tundra-type land where the land is very wet, very marshy, very spongy. And so there are no roads. You drive a four-wheeler along a boardwalk, you walk around the boardwalk. The boardwalks had been lifted up and just tangled and tossed, driven into the sides of homes. Homes had been lifted up off of their foundation and floated, not just floated a couple feet, floated miles away. And when you think about what this does, when it rips up boardwalks, when it lifts up homes off of their very foundation, the community's water source, gone. The boardwalks, which are their main roads, torn up, impassable. Again, homes are lifted up, ripped off their pilings, drifting miles away. And Mr. President, this all happened so quickly in the dark of night in October that most people were still in their homes. They hadn't been able to get the word to go to the school where it may be safer. These people were in their homes. Sewage lagoons were breached and failed, spilled massive amounts of human waste across the local environment, including across many of the key subsistence areas. And then in the cemeteries where the remains of their families are interred, the caskets began floating free in the waters. And it's hard to describe the devastation. It's hard to describe, even though I was able to see as we flew into Kipnuk, you could see across the wide vacant tundra a random house, cattywampus, over there. I could see small white oblongs in the tundra that I couldn't recognize, and it was only after I landed that I learned that those were caskets that had floated out and were now littered across the tundra. So 7 months beyond that event, people are still talking about the devastation to their community. And for those who were evacuated to Anchorage, adapting to life in our state's largest city has also posed its own challenges. And as I have said, the people who were evacuated are now safe from a storm, but they're facing other threats that are equally challenging. Right after the event, I was there again. It was about a week afterwards, and I went to visit the 2 congregate sheltering sites there in Anchorage to visit the evacuees. And I went up to one little girl. She was probably about 6 years old or so, and she was coloring. And I went over to say hello. She was super sweet. And I said, what picture have you drawn? And she showed me, and it was her house. And she says, this is me and my family in my house. And then she kind of hugs my leg, and she says, are you afraid of the dark? And I said, no, I'm not afraid of the dark. Are you afraid of the dark? And she said, I didn't used to be, but now I am. And I think about that little girl, and that storm is long gone. But the trauma that she shared, because I later learned that hers was one of the families that was drifting for hours in the dark, where their house is spinning around in the current until it slams into something that ultimately stops it. So that trauma for that 6-year-old, I don't know how that goes away. Anchorage is nearly 500 miles away and over 240 times bigger than Kipnuk and Quigillingok. Kipnuk, maybe 800 people on a good day. That's probably being generous with the numbers. But Anchorage is an urban place. It's English-dominated, it's close to mountainous terrain. Everything is different from what these people know in their village. It's impractical to live a subsistence lifestyle in Anchorage. Just a very quick case in point. Spring is the time of year when Native people who live out in these tundra villages, they'll go out and they'll gather eggs, seagull eggs, goose eggs, but it's part of the spring harvest that just brings great delight to them and to their families. And when I was visiting with some at this hearing that we had a few weeks back, I said, what's the hardest thing about being here in Anchorage? And they said, we can't get our subsistence food. Right now we should be gathering eggs. And I turned to my team and I said, there ought to be a way that even in a big city, you should be able to have a subsistence harvest. Long story short, I was able to deliver 280 seagull eggs that had been collected off the top of tall buildings, not the way that it is harvested, but they were given then to the elders of these villages who had been evacuated with the permission of our federal resource agencies. But it was just one small thing that makes me think we can try to put you in a safe place, but when everything else around you is foreign, it still becomes hard. The language barrier is a challenge. Accessing most social services in Anchorage requires at least passing knowledge of English, and so many of our conversations are field hearing. We had interpreters who were translating to those who primarily speak Yukdun. So challenges in terms of the gaps that we have. Students have been transferred to local schools in the Anchorage area and in the Bethel schools. They're doing the best that they can to adapt to urban life. But culture shock is very real, and we're seeing how it has taken a toll. We have heard that maybe at least one that we have confirmed, but possibly 2 young people have taken their own lives since relocating to Anchorage. Others, we've heard, have fallen victim to substance abuse. Others are becoming homeless and ending up on our streets. And I know there are strong social service organizations like YKHC, South Central Foundation, Rural CAP, ANTHC, the Anchorage School District, so many are doing their best to provide support to Halong survivors. But the truth is that the systems that we have in place to support communities after disasters like ex-Typhoon Halong were just simply not built to help relocate communities. They were not built to support evacuated people for long periods of time, and nor were they provided with the flexibility to support people for whom English is a second language. So lots of different things that we looked at and said, these are system failures here. So what do we do? Because these are Alaskans who need help. And from the time of the storm on, it's been my goal to ensure that they have the help that they need. Our field hearing was yet one more way to ensure people that they're heard, that their issues receive the federal attention that they demand. So the first part of our hearing was in Anchorage. We heard from elected tribal leaders and representatives from the native villages of Kipnuk and Quig-Illingok. Sometimes we just call it Kip and Quig because obviously it's easier to say Kip and Quig. But I'll tell you, so much of what we heard on that first day was really heartbreaking. Lucy Martin, who is Quig's Tribal Resilience and Planning Assistant, she described what it meant, what it felt like to be floating along the river in her home after it was detached from its foundation. Again, you're floating in a current, it's dark, there's nothing to see outside except dark. But what she did see were floating caskets of dead relatives going by her window. She said it was like living through a horror movie. And in his recounting of the evening that the storm hit, Kipnuk Chief Paul J. Paul just choked up. He had such a hard time describing how being in the house with his family in the dark, trying to be the strong adult when his young granddaughter, a 6-year-old granddaughter, said, "Grandpa," or "Appa, can we sing Silent Night?" Because she wanted to bring some quiet to the horror that they were living in as their home floated away. When I came before this chamber last year after the storm, directly after it, I noted how resilient the people of Alaska are, how community members, the National Guard, the Coast Guard, everyone worked tirelessly in preparation, rescue, and recovery efforts. And I will tell you, Mr. President, no doubt about it, these communities are resilient, and we saw that on display in our field hearings as leaders recounted their personal traumatic experience, but at the same time advocating for their communities and urging what the path forward should look like for their communities, but for also for others that may be threatened. But here we are 7 months after the storm, and it's clear that evacuees are just kind of in this limbo place. They have clearly expressed their preference to relocate, but they continue to grapple with a federal response system that can only facilitate their assimilation to a community that they're uncomfortable with, Anchorage or Bethel. It's just not home, it's different. But also a federal government that says, we'll help you, but you have to return to the site of the tragedy. So FEMA says, we're there for you, but you relocate where you are. You rebuild where you are. And in this case, it's a site that is now unstable, likely highly contaminated. Lucy Martin, again, she described the ground there as like walking on a Jell-O pad. She also said it felt like walking on a waterbed. So how do you reestablish a home in an area like that? These should not be the evacuees' only options. But we know firsthand in Alaska how challenging it can be to actually help communities relocate. It was actually the very first bill that I ever got signed into law here in my time in the United States Senate. And it was a land exchange that authorized or helped to facilitate the relocation of the Western Alaska community of Newtok. They wanted to relocate because, again, low-lying, marshy, very much on the coast, threatened by just the land around them. And so they had voted to relocate to a new site 9 miles upriver, a new site called McTarvik. And we introduced the land conveyance bill, the land exchange bill. It was signed into law by President Bush back in 2003. I wish that I could take credit for all the origins of this, but quite honestly, they go back to the 70s and the 80s when Newtok community members first became alarmed by the nearby riverine erosion. But it took until 2019 for the first Newtok residents to actually be able to relocate to McTarvik. And to this day, with the residents now relocated, they're dealing with substandard housing that perhaps went up too quick. I'm not going to assign blame for it, but the housing is still a challenge. Community facilities that are still not what we would like them to be. It has been painstakingly slow, and that's probably the best way to describe this process. Relocation also requires local communities to work together and to engage with federal, state, and regional partners for success. And my view on this whole issue of relocation, as hard as it is that we've got to figure out how we can be responsive to community needs, especially if these communities, like Kip and Quig, have experienced a disaster so destructive that the environment around them has fundamentally changed to the point of being unlivable. So if relocation is a community's top priority, how do we respect that? How do we ensure that there is a path available for it? We also need to do a better job supporting all communities that are affected by natural disasters. So the second day of our hearing kind of underscored that. In Bethel, we heard more about ex-Typhoon Halong and about the effects of Typhoon Merbok. This was a 2022 storm that, again, had pretty much ripped through that entire region, through the Bering Strait, all the way down to the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. And in between 2022 and 2025, they had a massive flooding event just this last year. So again, consecutive disasters that are coming through these regions. And what we heard on the second day of that field hearing was a lack of rural emergency response infrastructure. There are barriers to accessing FEMA and state assistance, and the fact that there's no coordinating entity at the federal level for disaster response and relocation efforts. We have in the state of Alaska a regional commission, the Denali Commission. It's well positioned in Alaska, but truth of the matter is it lacks the funding to address every need associated with relocation. And utilizing the Denali Commission alone would not solve similar issues that are faced by lower 48 communities. After the field hearing on that same day, it was a long day, but it was an important day. We hosted a listening session for tribal leaders and their designees, and what I heard was even in the communities that were not hit by ex-Typhoon Halong, or were just hit mildly, the effects of recent disasters and ongoing ecological changes are just dramatic in the region and are stretching into these out years, maybe decades into the future. We heard, for example, the native village of Chafornik's tribal president, Janet Eric. She shared that the community is combating a combination of riverine erosion, permafrost degradation, and overcrowding. And so Chafornik is not just sitting and waiting. They are pursuing a managed retreat strategy. They're building new homes on higher ground. They're putting them on pilings. They're putting them away from the adjacent river, while they're also working to remediate and remove buildings that are just literally close to falling into the waters there. In contrast, Kip Kipnuk and Quigilingok residents did not evacuate from Chefornik in the wake of Halong. Only about 10 homes sustained damage, and the community actually took in several evacuated families. So I think it shows that when you look at this through the lens of how can we be proactive to put ourselves in a safer situation like they were doing in the process of doing in Chefornik, it can make a difference. But even there in Chefornik, the sewage lagoon, the landfill were washed out, contaminating land where community members pick their berries, gather their greens, and hunt, as well as the waterways where they fish. And the land has changed, the waters have changed, an entirely new waterway has formed near the land along the road to the airstrip. And their boardwalks are sinking, again, due to the melting permafrost. So these are realities on the ground. For Alaskans living in coastal and riverside communities, it's not a question of if the next typhoon will hit, but really a matter of when. And Mr. President, I know we all have disasters that impact our states and communities. You come from a state where you see tornadoes coming through that bring about massive destruction. And I think we have to appreciate what happens in our respective states and the challenges then that we all have in responding. Alaska's challenges perhaps are a little bit accentuated because our geography is so massive and our communities are so isolated. When I describe an evacuation, it's not just getting in your car and being able to move to safety. You have to wait for a C-130 to be able to land and do a massive evacuation of your village in the situation of Kip and Quig and some of the others. And we also know that what happens, these communities were in the news, certainly in Alaska when all this was going on. Small community, big impact, but we have this tendency to just move from what we're seeing unfolding on our screens to the next disaster that has hit somewhere else. And the people who are living with that trauma and looking at the disaster still in their area, they can't look away. And I can't look away. You know, when Arctic typhoons, just think about Arctic in the same space as typhoon. There were no typhoons when I was growing up in Alaska, regardless of where I was living. But we are seeing these phenomena impact us, growing more frequent. 50-year floodplain estimates are now being reached in closer to 2 or 3 years. And so it's just hard to move away from the growing reality. We've got a emergency response manager. He's an extraordinary professional, Brian Fisher. He's been with the state of Alaska, a 30-year career in emergency services, and he testified to us at that hearing that out of 198 disasters that he had led the state response to, Typhoon Halong, he said, has been by far the most catastrophic. We know increased community threats from natural disasters, again, are not just a problem in Western Alaska or in Alaska in general. We've heard the stories from colleagues from North Carolina, from Tennessee, from Georgia, who were here to talk about the devastation following Hurricane Helene and the challenges that those communities have faced with federal disaster relief and recovery. There were also stories of tribal communities in Southwest Washington State and Louisiana that face worsening extreme weather events and sea level rise. So after our field hearing, it's even more clear to me that the systems in place to protect our communities don't work as we need them to. Going back to my example of Newtok moving to McTarvik, people want to view that relocation and say, success. We've relocated a village, and I suppose it is if you want to consider the simple idea that the community wanted to move, voted to move, and they have since moved. But a closer look reveals many difficult, expensive lessons learned along the way. That relocation was a generation plus in the making. Its great success is now arguably measured in the lives not lost during ex-Typhoon Halon. And I think about that, and I think we've got to have a higher bar than that. Success cannot be measured only in terms of life or death. It also must include the dignity afforded to communities that our constituents call home. So where does this put us? What do we do going forward? We all need to pay attention, show up for the people that we serve, and for each other. And in the coming months, my team and I will continue working with Alaska communities, the state, and other federal agencies to chart a path forward. And our goal is to establish a more nimble system for the communities facing environmental threats, one that works with them and for them. So a couple suggestions here. First, I think you need a lead agency. Back in 2004, witnesses from the state of Alaska expressed that this is just too much for the state to take on alone. That was true back in 2004, that's still true, and with the communities threatened across the country, there is a federal nexus. And we'll do better if we can pool experience and lessons learned and work from a centralized vantage point. Next, we need to take another look at the way that we have siloed community resilience away from disaster response. We need to ensure that all parties are communicating, they're pulling together on infrastructure hardening, pre-disaster planning and mitigation, disaster response, recovery, and relocation efforts. And we also need to ensure that these systems are easier to navigate. I hear this all the time. These systems have to be easier to navigate for the communities that they're strapped for resources. So narrow grants that have to be pieced together, oftentimes over the course of years, are not the most cost-effective way to address the problem, especially for tribal communities that are already struggling with low capacity. Right now, tribal leaders like Janet and her fellow council members in Chifornak, they're being asked to choose between building new homes for families that have moved in with relatives since their old homes were literally leaning into the river, or decommissioning and decontaminating old buildings that are also about to fall into the river. I do want to acknowledge, and we're very grateful for the $16.7 million that the BIA just awarded to Chifornak through the Tribal Community Resilience Program. But this is just a start, because those are impossible choices that are facing too many of our communities. It's not just Chifornak. In the meantime, I promise not to look away and to keep bringing folks up to Alaska to see, to understand, to hear. As conversations continue about the best way to structure our disaster response system, I want to work with colleagues, both sides of the aisle, wherever you are, to address not only the unique needs in my home state, but of all our states, and make sure that they're adequately addressed. Our disasters and the response to them may look different, I get that, but our people all deserve the same access to safety and disaster response, and I don't think, we can't lose sight of that. I also want to acknowledge Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs, Billy Kirkland. Assistant Secretary Kirkland and his staff showed up for the people of my state. He sat with me for hours as we heard from the people of Kipnuk and Kwigillingok when we had our field hearing in Anchorage, and then he traveled with me to Bethel as we heard from tribal leaders across the YK Delta on these very important issues. And as we listened, I was struck by some words from Charlotte Nayagak. She's from the Chivak Native Village, and she's worked on disaster recovery and prevention in the region for many years. And she said, she went up to the mic and she had like 2 minutes to speak, but she started off by saying, finally someone from out there, not just from Alaska, finally somebody is listening to us. We need this help. Finally somebody is listening to us. So imagine spending decades watching as Charlotte described, the erosion of your land getting worse and worse each year, happening faster and faster, and just feeling like nobody from outside your community, nobody from outside your state is listening. We should all be listening, Mr. President. We should all be working together to provide a better future, even for the darkest disasters, for the people that we serve, no matter where they live. So, Mr. President, I look forward to working with all of my colleagues to do just that. And I thank you. I also want to acknowledge, before I close, I have a member of my Indian Affairs team that has been with me now for a couple years. She started off at a very junior level and has worked her way up to a level of trust and responsibility within the committee. She's going off to pursue dreams of higher education in significant institutions, but she has been a true asset to the committee and to me, and so I want to acknowledge the good work of Sarah on my team and wish her well. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, we are looking at Memorial Day weekend, and certainly on Monday, taking that time to pause and reflect on the brave men and women from Tennessee and indeed across the entire country who have made the ultimate sacrifice in defending our freedoms right here. Tennessee is really so blessed to have a very strong military community. In our state, we have more than 400,000 veterans that call Tennessee home. They indeed enrich our communities with their records of service and sacrifice. We also have several major military installations in our state. There is Fort Campbell, which primarily sits in the state of Tennessee. There is Arnold Engineering Development Center, an Air Force base, which is in Tullahoma. In Millington, we have the Naval Air Station. And we also have our Army and Air National Guard facilities across our state. To each and every one of these individuals that call Tennessee home, that raise their hand, take that oath, and serve, we say thank you. And it is an honor to represent so many service members and veterans in our state. Now, these veterans and service members do represent the best of what this nation has to offer. They're leaders, public servants, warriors who put their lives on the line every day. And the loss of any single one of them is deeply felt in their home communities and across our state. Now, last June, we lost Chief Warrant Officer 3, Dustin Wright. He was a pilot assigned to the 101st Airborne Combat Aviation Brigade, and he was lost during a helicopter training accident at Fort Campbell. His brigade commander said that he, and I'm quoting, cherished every opportunity to be outside and support ground troops with strength and honor. He was a member of the Mosaic Church in Clarksville, Tennessee, where he served on the security team. His awards included the Meritorious Service Medal, the Air Medal with C device, the Army Commendation Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, and the Army Achievement Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. Now, he had many other awards also, and we must never forget his legacy and the legacy of each of these that have served across our state and have lost their lives in service to our nation. We can never repay that sacrifice, but we must always honor their service. And for our nation's veterans, we must ensure that they receive the benefits and the timely access that they have earned so that they're getting the quality care that they deserve. On the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, we're working on several pieces of legislation to ensure that veterans' needs are going to be met in that timely manner. My Veterans Health Care Freedom Act would place veterans at the center of the community care referral process and empower them to seek care from providers right in their home communities. They wouldn't have to rely solely on these VA facilities. They could go there at home when it was convenient for them. And this is important to us in Tennessee because 78 of our 95 counties are considered rural, and many vets face challenges when they are trying to access care through the VA facilities. As warfare becomes increasingly complex, the veteran population will require more sophisticated care than previous generations, and community care will be essential in meeting these needs. Now, also earlier this year, I introduced the Veterans Bill of Rights Act. This would ensure veterans are clearly informed of their existing rights, which are regarding their VA health care benefits and services. Too often, complex statutes, regulations, and internal policies can leave veterans unsure about the resources that are available to them, which they have earned through their services. This legislation would address it by requiring the Department of Veterans Affairs to clearly inform our veterans of their existing benefits and services and health care, and to make certain they know their rights. In March, I also introduced the bipartisan Women Veteran Specialty Care Access Act to improve access to specialty care, including gynecology, obstetrics, maternity, postpartum care for our female veterans. What we do know is that female veterans are one of the fastest growing populations that are served by the VA, and we need to do everything in our power to ensure they receive the care they've earned in a timely manner. To expand access to evidence-based mental health care for our veterans, my Recover Act would strengthen partnerships between the VA and community-based mental health care providers. To cut red tape and improve care for our veterans and service members, I'm working on legislation that would require the Department of War and VA to establish a uniform credentialing service for medical providers. Right now, clinicians who transfer between Department of War and VA facilities can face months-long approval delays before they're able to treat patients again. This makes absolutely no sense at all. Why would we delay the clinicians from being able to move from a hospital in the DOW system to a VA facility? So, our legislation would help create a streamlined process so that providers can get where they're needed at the fastest possible moment and deliver the care for our vets and our service members. I hope this Memorial Day provides an opportunity for each and every American to reflect on the service of our fallen heroes and to commit ourselves to ensuring that our service members and our veterans receive the care, honor, and respect that they have earned. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Senator from Nevada,
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be
without
proceeded.
objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, I am here on the floor of the Senate today because I want to talk about what is happening this week with the reconciliation package and that Republicans are attempting to move this week. For many that might be watching, or maybe it's just my family that's watching, who knows, but many that are out there, let me just say, what is happening right now are Republican leaders in Congress, in essence, are trying to give billions of dollars more in funding to an out-of-control federal immigration enforcement agencies that are brutalizing our communities. And I want to be clear about something. We all agree that we need strong border security and that criminals need to face justice. I'm going to say it again. We need strong border securities. Criminals must face justice. And President Trump said his administration would be going after the worst of the worst. But what really is happening is that masked and unidentifiable agents roaming around, arresting and even killing American citizens, racially profiling people, including Latinos, and deporting dreamers. And I am here to tell my colleagues that if you're not paying attention to the American public and you're listening to them, because if you are, you're hearing that they're saying enough. They want safe communities, but not lawlessness and fear-mongering. And that's why my Democratic colleagues and I have been clear since February. You will not get our votes on new funding for immigration and customs enforcement and border patrol unless it includes common sense guardrails to rein in these agencies' abuses. Over the last several months, unfortunately, President Trump and Republican leadership have showed us time and time again that they are simply not interested in doing the right thing here, or even the popular thing. Now, I want people to keep in mind that Republicans have already given these two agencies $150 billion in their so-called big, beautiful bill. They did that with another reconciliation package. They have plenty of money. ICE and CBP have plenty of money to operate for years to come because their annual budget is only around $8 billion, $8 to $10 billion. They have $150 billion. But now what is happening this week is that at the request of Donald Trump, Republicans now want to add another $70 billion to these agencies on top of the $150 billion they have. That multi-billion-dollar check isn't for lowering the price of groceries for Americans. It's not lowering the cost of energy for Americans or health care or even helping them put more gas in their tanks at a lower cost. That's not what this is. It's not bringing back the manufacturing jobs this administration has lost us. And it definitely is not making our communities any safer. We know that because we're seeing what federal immigration enforcement has been doing with the $150 billion they already got in their mass deportation efforts. Let me tell you, they're not spending on going after the worst and the worst. They're not doing that. I've seen that in Nevada, and we have seen that across the country. In March of this year, I stood right here and I told 10 stories of dreamers who have been detained or deported by federal immigration enforcement. Dreamers and DACA recipients, they are neighbors, they are friends, they're community leaders, they're teachers, they're doctors, they're small business owners in my state and other states, and they are not criminals. In fact, they've had to follow the law to the letter in order to maintain their